Kale Rivers had been Earth's cultural liaison for 18 months, which sounded impressive until you realized the job description was essentially attend 1,000 parties and try not to start an interstellar incident by blinking incorrectly. 47 diplomatic functions in, he still couldn't keep the etiquette straight. Direct eye contact, was that a challenge? A courtship signal? An invitation to ritual combat? Kale had heard all three said with absolute confidence by 3 different instructors during orientation, so he developed a strategy. Look at 4 heads. A safe, neutral zone. The social equivalent of walking down the middle of a hallway to avoid touching either wall. It had been working, mostly, tonight. However, his forehead-focused gaze was giving him a tension headache and making him feel like he was about to fail a vision test. The grand ballroom of Meridian Crossing sprawled across the station's central ring, like a luxurious delirium dreamed up by someone who believed subtlety was an insult. The walls were lined with bioluminescent panels that didn't simply glow, they judged. They shifted color based on the emotional average of the crowd, like a giant mood ring with a security clearance. At the moment, the light swirled through diplomatic blue and cautious green, with intermittent flares of amber that Kale had learned to interpret as carefully smothered irritation. He'd once asked what purple meant and had been told, very politely, never to ask that again. The air hummed with overlapping translation fields, soft pressures against his ears, as the station's systems converted 17 languages and at least 3 pheromone-based communication methods into something his brain could handle without liquefying. Whenever too many fields overlapped, it felt like standing beside a subwoofer that was playing diplomacy at a frequency only anxiety could hear. Across the room, a Centauri ambassador performed a series of slow, ornate steps in front of a trade representative from New Saturn. It looked like a courtship ritual, but Kale suspected it was actually tariff negotiation. The difference, in his experience, was mostly the number of people taking notes. The music was worse. Meridian Crossing's entertainment algorithm generated compositions engineered to offend no one. It succeeded in the way processed nutritional paste succeeded, technically perfect, emotionally empty, and faintly suggestive of a committee's fear. Kale was edging toward the refreshment tables, because if this station offered anything like alcohol, he needed it not enough to embarrass Earth, just enough to stop imagining that every fork was a weapon. Then he saw her. She stood near one of the observation windows where the curve of the station's hull opened into a panoramic view of starlight. The ballroom's motion and chatter swirled round her like water round a stone. She wasn't trying to look important. She simply was still. A steadiness so complete it made everyone else seem frantic. By comparison, her skin caught the ambient light, pale and luminous, as though it had been polished. Dark hair fell in loose waves past her shoulders, absorbing brightness like ink in water. Her gown moved like it didn't fully agree with gravity-black fabric that rippled and reshaped itself, as if shadow had been convinced to behave like silk. But it wasn't her appearance that hooked Kale's attention. It was her expression. He recognized it because he'd worn it himself in reflective surfaces at 100 diplomatic functions. The look of someone who wanted to join the joy. but had stopped believing they were allowed to ask for it. Longing disguised as composure. Hope tucked away like an embarrassing secret. The kind of loneliness that didn't beg, it simply waited. And she was alone. Kale's training whispered warnings: observe, assess, consult the protocol index. Do not improvise, but his feet ignored it and started moving. He threaded between clusters of dignitaries discussing interstellar matters with the solemnity of monks cataloguing stars. A Martian delegate was demonstrating something with elaborate hand gestures to a group of officials who had perfected the art of looking engaged while mentally scheduling their escape. The closer Kale got, the more he noticed a subtle distortion around the woman. Like the air had become slightly thicker. Her translation field shimmered differently than everyone else's, as if her speech required extra work to become comprehensible. Or perhaps Meridian Crossing's state-of-the-art systems were doing what state-of-the-art systems always did, failing in innovative ways. When Kale reached her, she turned. Her eyes were so dark they seemed to drink the light rather than reflect it. Up close, the stillness wasn't emptiness, it was control. Like a coiled spring that had decided to be elegant, Kale forced himself to smile. Not the professional, diplomatic smile he wore like armor, but the real one, the one that crinkled his eyes and made him look like a person instead of a policy. "Would you like to dance?" he asked. For a heartbeat, she only looked at him. Kale's brain helpfully generated a rapid slideshow of possible disasters. Perhaps he'd just made a marriage proposal. Perhaps he'd challenged her to a duel. Perhaps he'd insulted her ancestors, her species, and the window she'd been standing near. He began mentally composing an apology that could be translated into 12 languages and at least one scent cloud. Then her expression shifted. It wasn't dramatic in the theatrical sense. It was dramatic in the human sense, like watching a locked door swing open. Her features softened, the distance melting away. Surprise sparked, then something warmer. Delight so quick it seemed to catch her off guard. She smiled, and it made her seem suddenly younger, less untouchable, more present. "Yes," she said, voice warm and smooth, like honey warmed by sun. "I would like that very much." When she placed her hand in his, Kale noticed her skin was cool, not unpleasantly so, just different, like polished stone kept in a shaded room. It should have felt strange, but it didn't. It felt calming somehow, like stepping into quiet. They moved toward the dance floor. As they passed, Kale saw conversations pause. Heads turned. A ripple moved through the crowd, subtle but unmistakable. People shifted away from their path with the careful urgency of those avoiding a spill. A Jupiter delegate actually took 2 steps backward, eyes widening. Kale's first thought was, "I forgot deodorant." His second thought was, "No, wait, the station can filter atmospheres for 17 worlds. It can probably filter my shame too." They reached the dancers, and Kale took what he hoped was a standard waltz position, the one dance he could do, without endangering anyone's skeletal integrity. The music changed, the algorithm apparently detecting their intention and adjusting in real time. They began to move. "I should warn you," Kale said, trying for lightness as his feet remembered what coordination used to feel like. "I'm not great at this." Your toes are entering a high-risk zone. She laughed. The sound was delicate and bright, like crystal chiming together. I believe I can survive, she said. Around them, dancers created space more than polite, nearly strategic. Kale decided to interpret it as kindness rather than terror. "What's your name?" she asked. "Kale Rivers," he said, "Earth's cultural liaison," which is a fancy way of saying I attend parties and try not to start wars by using the wrong fork. Have you started any wars? Not on purpose. There was an incident involving a Venusian diplomat and some cheese. It remains under review. Her smile widened, and Kale felt absurdly pleased at the sound of her amusement. She was easy to talk to, which was dangerous. Easy made him forget rules. They moved through the waltz, and then somehow another dance. Kale didn't know what it was. The algorithmic music was too carefully neutral to give him clues. But she adapted like breathing, guiding them with effortless precision. "You're very good," Kale said, half awed, half relieved she could compensate for his fumbling. "I've had practice," she replied. There was something in her tone, an echo of time, of decades stacked like books, that suggested her idea of practice wasn't a few lessons, and a brave attitude. Kale filed that away under interesting, but not my business. By the third dance, he realized she was genuinely enjoying herself. The evidence was solid. She hadn't used an excuse to vanish. She was laughing at an alarming percentage of his jokes, and the guarded resignation in her expression had faded into something freer. "So," Kale said as they rotated past a cluster of observers pretending not to watch, "what brings you to Meridian Crossing?" "Let me guess, a treaty that will alter the political balance of the outer colonies." "Something like that," she said, eyes glinting with amusement, "though I find the politics less interesting than the dancing." "Politics is just theater," Kale said, narrowly avoiding stepping on her foot as another couple swept by. "For people who can't remember their lines." She tilted her head, her ears longer than human standard, tapering into elegant points, got the light. Kale felt a jolt of shame. He should have recognized her species. Orientation had covered the major delegates. He'd absolutely skipped that briefing for lunch. "You don't find your work fulfilling," she observed. "Oh, no, I love my job," Kale said quickly, because the universe had taught him never to let statements like that drift uncorrected. "It's just absurd. I'm supposed to prevent incidents by remembering whether the Titan delegation prefers beverages at exactly 17 degrees Celsius. That is a great deal of pressure for one person." "It is, and I barely passed my psychological evaluation." "How did you get this position?" "Then I passed the written exams," Kale said. "I just tested poorly on appropriate seriousness during crisis simulations." Apparently making jokes while pretending to repel an alien invasion is concerning. She laughed again, bright, ringing, and this time Kale noticed the crowd's reaction intensify. Eyes followed them. A cluster of officials had gathered near a support column, whispering urgently, their expressions tight. "Does it bother you?" she asked quietly. "Being watched?" Kale glanced around. "We're being watched?" I assumed people were admiring my flawless technique. He attempted a turn that was only mildly disastrous. "They're acting strange," he admitted. Maybe the cheese incident made it onto some kind of interstellar cautionary list. "Tell me about the cheese," she said, clearly delighted. "It's not as exciting as it sounds," Kale sighed. "Venusians have a cultural prohibition against dairy from Earth animals. No one told me. I offered an ambassador-aged cheddar. He excused himself so politely you'd think he'd merely remembered a dinner appointment. But I'm fairly sure I'm banned from their embassy now." The music shifted faster, sharper. Kale panicked, but she carried them smoothly into the new rhythm, making him look like he belonged there. "You asked me to dance," she said after a moment. "Why?" "Because you looked like you wanted to," Kale replied simply, and no one else had asked. Something softened in her expression, as if she'd been bracing for a different answer. "That's all?" she asked. "No other reason. Should I have had one?" Kale said. "Was there a form? A request in triplicate? Because, if so, I am deeply unqualified. And I apologize to the entire station. No forms," she said, and her voice held something faintly wistful. "I'm simply not accustomed to being approached without extensive preparation." "Preparation for dancing sounds like a crime," Kale said. "Dancing should be spontaneous. Otherwise, it's just organized movement. Which is technically what dancing is. But you know what I mean." "I do," she said quietly. "More than you realize." They shifted into a slower pace, and conversation came easier. Kale noticed the crowd's bubble round them had grown even larger. A Martian delegate actually stumbled backward into a refreshment table, sending a few luminous glasses shattering to the floor in a splash of glowing liquid. No one laughed. Everyone pretended it hadn't happened. Kale frowned. "Is there some kind of contamination alert I missed?" Before she could answer, a familiar face appeared near the ballroom entrance. David Chen, Kale's colleague, looking like he'd discovered a hole in the universe and was personally responsible for patching it. David's skin had gone pale enough to reflect the bioluminescent panels. "Your friend seems concerned," she said. "David always looks like that at parties." Kale assured her. "His default expression is mildly haunted." David began gesturing more aggressively, the frantic motions of someone trying to stop a disaster already in motion. "Huh?" Kale admitted. "That's a more intense version of his haunted face. You might wish to speak with him," she said gently. Kale hesitated, then nodded, steering them toward the refreshment tables as the music shifted again. Rows of beverages waited in temperature-controlled containers, each color and viscosity implying a different gamble. Kale gestured at the options. "Station rule. Half of these will intoxicate you. A quarter are basically flavored water, and the remaining quarter will cause gastrointestinal distress unless you're from the right planet. It's like roulette, but with fewer lawsuits and more treaties." "Which is safest?" she asked. "The blue one," Kale said. "It's from Earth, designed to be inoffensive. It tastes like fruit punch that gave up and became disappointed in itself." She laughed and reached for the blue drink. Her cool fingers brushed Kale's as she took the glass, and he noticed nearby delegates flinch as if contact were contagious. "Okay," Kale thought. "That's new." Before he could follow that thought, David was suddenly at Kale's elbow, with the urgency of a man watching someone pet an unexploded weapon. "Kale," David said through clenched teeth, "can I talk to you now?" "Sure," Kale said, still trying to keep his tone casual. "But make it quick. I'm in the middle of my extremely important beverage briefing." David grabbed Kale's arm and hauled him behind a decorative plant that looked like it had evolved on a planet that hated symmetry. "What is wrong with you?" David hissed. "Depends on the day," Kale whispered back. "But currently, I'm socializing." "You're dancing," David said, voice trembling. He pointed toward the woman with the blue drink as if pointing at a predator. "With her?" "Yes," Kale said, confused. "She's lovely, excellent dancer. Laughs at my jokes, which is rare enough that I'm considering filing a report." David stared at him like Kale had just announced plans to wrestle a black hole. "Do you know who that is?" "She told me her name is Celivra," Kale said. "And I'm pretty sure she's been carrying me through these dances like a saint." David made a sound between a laugh and a sob. "Kale, that is Queen Celivra." Kale blinked. "Okay, Queen. Regal. Love that for her. Queen of the Sanguin Territories," David said, voice cracking. "She's one of the oldest sovereigns in known space." Kale processed that slowly, like loading a file with corrupted metadata. "And," David added, lowering his voice even further, "she's a vampire queen." The words landed like ice water. Kale's mind replayed the last hour in rapid flashes. Her cool skin, the way the crowd backed away, the unnatural grace, the eyes that seemed to swallow light. "Oh," Kale said finally, very softly, "that's information." David's hands tightened on Kale's shoulders. People negotiate for weeks just to stand in the same room with her. Entire delegations rehearse every word. Dancing with her isn't casual, it's a statement. It's a message. It's politics wrapped in music. Kale looked back. Celivra stood by the refreshments now, with two figures in dark formal wear leaning in to speak. Urgently at her side, she listened without changing expression, serene as stone. But Kale saw it then. The stillness wasn't just elegance. It was capability, the kind of calm that belonged to something that could move faster than thought. As if sensing his gaze, she lifted her eyes to meet his across the distance. Her smile was small, knowing, edged with amusement. She'd known exactly what he was. She'd known exactly what he wasn't. "She's laughing at me," Kale murmured. "Of course she is," David said miserably. "You probably gave her the most entertainment she's had in decades. The question now is what you do next." "I go back," Kale said, surprising even himself with how certain he sounded. "We were having a nice time." David looked like he might faint. Kale gently removed David's hands from his shoulders. "I didn't approach her because she's powerful. I approached her because she looked lonely." She said yes. She laughed. For an hour she was just a person who wanted to dance. "That's insane." "Probably," Kale admitted. "But so far, insanity has kept me employed." He straightened his jacket and walked back toward the refreshment table. The crowd parted around him as if he carried a field of danger. Faces watched with fascination and alarm. The two dark-clad attendants stepped back as Kale approached, their posture rigid with disapproval. Celivra turned fully toward him. Kale picked up his own blue drink and took a sip. It still tasted like abandoned optimism. "So," he said, forcing himself into honesty, "apparently you're royalty. That explains why David looks like he's seeing the end of the universe. I feel like that might have come up somewhere between the dancing and my cheese-related failures." Her laughter this time was less controlled, more real. A sound that seemed to vibrate the air in a way that made the translation fields shiver. "I did enjoy watching your face when you learned," she said. "That's fair," Kale replied. "I've had worse done to me in the name of diplomacy." She reached out and touched his arm lightly. Coolly, the contact drew a visible ripple of discomfort from nearby delegates. "Like a wind passing through grass when you asked me," she said quietly. "Do you know what I thought? That I was brave." Kale guessed. "That you were ignorant," she said, not unkindly, "and that your ignorance was precious." He frowned. "Everyone who approaches me knows exactly who I am," she continued. "Every word is calculated. Every gesture is weighed. When someone asks me to dance, it is never simply dancing. It is a declaration, a request, a demonstration. It is exhausting." "That sounds awful," Kale said honestly. "It is," she said. "But you asked because I looked like I wanted to. For an hour, I was not a queen. I was simply someone being invited." Warmth spread through Kale's chest, cutting through his embarrassment. "So I accidentally did something right for completely wrong reasons." She smiled, and there was something almost vulnerable in it. "That is often how the best things happen." One of the dark-clad attendants stepped forward tall, severe, with a face carved from centuries of disapproval. "Your Majesty," he said, voice heavy with formality. "This interaction is drawing considerable attention." "Protocol, Lord Thuron," Celivra said pleasantly, and something in her tone made him stiffen. "Are you suggesting I should stop enjoying myself at a diplomatic gathering designed for enjoyment?" "No, Your Majesty," he said quickly. "Only that protocol dictates my dignity," she said. "Not my company." She turned back to Kale. "Unless you have had enough of complicated implications." Kale glanced at the crowd, the panic, the whispers, David's horrified vigil. "I was going to spend tonight leaning against walls and looking professionally concerned," he said. "We're dancing with vampire royalty, while various officials quietly implode is objectively more interesting. So if you're willing to keep breaking protocol, I'm in." Celivra's smile brightened, and for a moment she looked delighted in a way no title could contain. "Then one more dance," she said. The attendant retreated with the reluctant obedience of someone who had survived long enough to learn when to stop arguing. They returned to the dance floor. The music softened, becoming intimate in that carefully manufactured way Meridian Crossing did everything. Kale's nerves buzzed, but Celivra's hand in his steadied him. "What happens after this?" he asked. Quietly. "Do I make a statement? Sign something? Swear an oath not to accidentally dance with any more vampire queens?" Her gaze held his, dark and steady. After this, she said, I will make it clear that your invitation was not presumption. It was recognition. Recognition of what? That even queens, she said, voice gentle, might sometimes want to dance without centuries sitting on their shoulders. Kale exhaled slowly. Around them, officials repositioned like chess pieces, preparing to either claim credit for or distance themselves from whatever message this would become in the political narrative. I should warn you, Celivra added, by dancing with you, I have made a statement about Earth's standing in relation to the Sanguin Territories. They will analyze it for weeks. Kale grimaced. Is it at least a good statement? It is, she said, and her mouth curved faintly. A statement that genuine kindness can outweigh calculated intent. The song drew toward its end. The ballroom's energy shifted as guests began their elaborate departures, drifting back. 2 ships and corridors, carrying stories they would repeat with carefully adjusted emphasis. When the final notes faded, Celivra leaned closer, voice for him alone. Next time there is a gathering, she murmured, perhaps you will ask me. Again now that you know who I am. Kale swallowed. Will it cause massive political complications? Almost certainly, then. He said, smiling, I'll definitely ask. Celivra stepped back, and the transformation was instant. The softness shuttered, the stillness sharpened. The Queen returned. Her attendants appeared at her sides as if summoned by gravity. She inclined her head with formal grace and moved into the crowd, a dark star drawing all attention without asking for it. David reappeared beside Kale, looking as though his soul had aged 10 years. I can't believe you survived, David whispered. I can't believe I danced with vampire royalty for an hour and thought the biggest problem was my footwork, Kale said, watching Celivra disappear toward the exit. Though in retrospect, the cool skin, the way everyone kept backing away, and the terrifying competence probably should have tipped me off. David stared at him. What are you going to put in your report? Kale considered the question, then smiled. The truth, he said, that I asked someone to dance because she looked like she wanted to, and it turned out to be the most honest piece of diplomacy I've done in my entire career. David groaned softly. You're going to get 1,000 analysts arguing over that sentence. Good, Kale said, still watching the doorway where the vampire queen had vanished. Let them. Maybe they'll learn something. He took another sip of the blue drink and immediately regretted it. And David, he added. Yes? Before the next gathering, Kale said, you're explaining vampire protocol to me. David sighed. Of course, because apparently you've decided to revolutionize interstellar relations by being an impulsive idiot with good intentions. Kale grinned. It's my brand. And somewhere in the station's shifting lights between diplomatic blue and cautious greener, flash of amber sparked like laughter trying not to be seen.